Yeah, Doug Elgato Wilson. I thought that might be good. And I Googled you and I found a couple others. And I didn't know if they were really associated to you or not. So I don't know if that tattoo belongs to you or not. But and then the guy with the beard.
Luckily, it does not.
No. I thought about putting a cat in Jen's hair just to do something there. But so welcome to both you and Jen. And Jen, since I didn't know you, I didn't find any special pictures of you just yet. But I wanted to thank you guys. I think I've made you both presenters. Let's make sure here. I think you're set up.
Oh, I can share. Yeah.
Yep, good. Okay, yeah. So thank you guys and congratulations, Jen. New MVP, right? Just started in September, I believe. So congratulations.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. So let's kick off this last session here. I will stop sharing and hand it over to you guys.
Perfect. I need just a moment to get the slide deck going so I can share out the appropriate slide. And I believe, let me know if that's presenting for everyone, please.
I see it. And you guys have cool chairs, by the way.
Thank you. Adam Gross convinced me to get this one, so.
Gamer chair.
It's quite comfy.
Yeah.
We all need comfy chairs here these days.
Right. All right. Jen, are you able to request control on this at all?
No. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
Well, hi, everybody. So as you all know, my name is Doug Wilson, Microsoft MVP in Enterprise Mobility. I've been a part of a lot of user groups around the Twin Cities. And speaking today will be Jen Sheeran and myself. And Jen, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. I really try. And we are speaking mostly on Windows Virtual Desktop. It's kind of it's becoming more and more popular, I know. And Jen has significant experience in the Citrix and VHD or that world, I would say. Some of the areas, again, talking about WVD, deployment scenarios, and some around app management and imaging, as well as, well, everything about it. And then as Greg kindly shared a couple pictures of us, yes, I use that cat picture for all my professional stuff as well now. It was a birthday gift to me, so I take full advantage of it. And then again, Jen's I call newly minted MVP as of September 1st, and we are very, very excited to have her with us in our community.
Thank you, and hello everyone, and thank you for having me at this great event. As everyone said, my name is Jen Sheeran. I'm in Tampa, Florida, sunny Florida, and I do a lot of community work, as you can tell. I'm in my second year as a Citrix technology advocate and the new MVP. I'm also the founder and leader of the USA WVD user group, and I'm also one of the local leaders for Citrix user group community in the Tampa Bay area, as well as a woman in tech mentor. And as Greg said, I currently work for Presidio. I'm a senior engineer doing delivery on both WVD and Citrix solutions. And I've worked in end user computing for over 10 years, primarily focused on Citrix, and in recent years, obviously cloud solutions in both Citrix Cloud and Microsoft Azure.
I was distracted by beeping. So some of the use cases, the common things that we're seeing for WVD, at least a lot of the main ones will be we have a lot of remote workforce, especially with people always working from home or in certain areas. It's easier just to manage virtual machines for them or have them connect from any of their devices, so it doesn't maybe it doesn't have to be as powerful. Business continuity. If you have capacity changes, I know a lot of organizations have seasonal growth or ups and downs with that. It seems to be a lot easier to help manipulate that and control it with your environment with virtual machines. So if you have lower end workstations or even tablets or other devices, you can easily connect into your virtual environment and access the resources that are needed there.
So before we dive into the components, let's take a walkthrough of the user experience. After all, user experience is the key to any deployment. We'll start with under the hood. So on the left, we have the various clients that can be used to connect to WVD. The user has a choice of the Windows Remote Desktop Client available in the Windows Store, similarly with Apple and Android devices, or an HTML-compatible browser. The Remote Desktop Client is recommended by Microsoft for best experience, and if you're using Teams on WVD, it's a must. In the middle, you have the WVD PaaS services, which comprise of the infrastructure components that are managed by Microsoft. The components on the right are the managed by IT resources or customer managed. And that's the session host images, the user profile, and authentication. And we'll be talking about that mostly today. So how does this work? Well, a WVD agent is installed on the VMs, and that allows them to register with the WVD broker. So if I'm a user, a user enters aka.ms/wvd-arm-web, which is a short URL, in an HTML5 browser, and gets prompted in Azure Active Directory for authentication. The user then receives a token that is then presented to the web access service, and this is where the user sees the apps and desktops from the application groups based on their permissions that were granted. So when the user clicks on the icon, they then get connected to the WVD gateway, and that starts the session. The WVD broker is the orchestrator that sends the session host to the gateway, and this is an outbound only 443 connection, also known as reverse connect. So let's see this in action with a demo. So in this demo, I'll use an HTML5 browser and enter that short URL, aka.ms/wvd-arm-web. The URL is redirected, and I'm prompted to enter Azure Active Directory credentials. If you remember from the previous slide, this is number 2. Also note, I purposely did not set up MFA to demonstrate the default experience, but you definitely want to set up MFA. So next, I'm at the web access service where I can see the icons and click on the shared desktop icon to launch. The connection is sent to the WVD gateway, and I'm prompted to enter Active Directory credentials just like when I log into Windows 10. Now the broker orchestrates to send the session host to the gateway, and I'm presented here with a Windows 10 desktop, and I can see my apps. Okay. So now that we have a good overview of the goal, let's talk about the design. Like any project, there are design considerations. Will you use Terraform to automate the deployment and updates? Do you have Config Manager already being used on premises? And Doug will tell us a little bit more about that later. Is there a learning curve that will slow down timelines? These are some of the items that impact decisions. When we design a WVD deployment, we need to make decisions on the size of the VM, how many total users will be using WVD, what is the max number of users on a multi-session host, and obviously, the applications installed on the session host will impact all of these decisions. Maybe we have some users that need full admin rights to the desktop and special software. In that case, a personal desktop may be best instead of a pool or a shared desktop. So to help us answer some of these design questions, Microsoft has given us guidance on planning. Here are some of the different workload types and estimates of the maximum user per vCPU, along with the size estimates of the instances and the profile container storages. Obviously, there's no one size fit all, but this gives us a good starting point to get us going. We can further categorize the users in groups based on their persona to help understand and answer some of those design questions. And I have some examples here that you can see on the screen.
I do want to say, I know for people who want to spin these up in labs, some of the design considerations they have here can be a little pricey. So I always pick as cheap as I can go. I think my shared VMs are like $12 a month, because definitely cheap, but very slow if more than one person connects to it.
Yeah, you do the B series. The B series are really cheaper.
They get the testing done.
Yes, yes. All right. So now that we've talked about design, the first thing we need to look at is network, right? The hub and spoke architecture, which you're probably all familiar with by now, is what's recommended by Microsoft, where WVD is built on the spoke. And one of the requirements for WVD is that the VMs need to be domain joined. So if you're already using M365, you probably are syncing users to Azure Active Directory, which means you have AD somewhere either in Azure or connected to an on-premises domain controller. I can probably spend a whole day on this. So I think we're...
So image building, I really like the idea of the image building that WVD has. I think it's still maybe not in all of our comfort zones yet. And what I mean by that is a lot of us are comfortable with like operating system deployment, so OSD or MDT, and I'm starting to play in that realm to see if there's a way to get that tied into Azure storage to do more of an automated maintenance. I'm hoping actually to reach out to a few people in the community here, or if you guys have ideas on it, please share up. But one of the main things around WVD or setting up host pools and the VMs there is you can use built-in images straight from Microsoft, which is what that screenshot is showing. Otherwise, we can build our custom image using solutions such as like Azure Image Builder. Now, to break it to be very, very simple, one thing that we can do during new trials or building out machines is to actually go out to Azure, make a new virtual machine and customize it to be exactly what we want. And then we're able to sys prep that and actually capture that with the Azure virtual machine. Now, I know some of the stuff is in early preview, so you sometimes want to grab, such as an insider preview, or make sure that you're grabbing the 2004 image. Part of the issue I have is during some of my testing, I brought down my labs just by trying to over architect it. But otherwise, what I'm actually really proud about is, well, Jen was showing the hub and spoke design earlier with WVD. I actually was able to rebuild the entire environment this morning using just Azure AD Active Directory services. So I have WVD running in a full just Azure environment without any on-premise, which is oddly enough not the preferred route. If you have a local domain, it's a lot easier and honestly a lot more efficient. But where we get back into kind of image management in general, and this is another area I like to hear from the community, is how people like to manage a large pool of devices. And it's where Config Manager, I feel, is going to start coming in more and more. Because I know in 2006, Configuration Manager has a new feature where instead of just specifying Windows 10 versions, we can specify a multi-user version of Windows 10, which is geared for Windows Virtual, a desktop. So, and that brings up, so managing WVD, a lot of times when we're doing images for virtual machines, we have a gold image. So we are needing to manage that or micromanage that more by redeploying that gold image on more of a monthly cadence with application updates or any major changes to Windows, because we don't want multi-user sessions just going out and updating automatically. Usually when we have higher processing, that's frowned upon, because especially if you have local storage, maybe we don't want to just burden that storage with trying to run Notepad++ updates every day or Adobe Reader. So being able to use something like Configuration Manager for future state, I know, again, 2006, if you're not there and you want to start playing with that, make sure you're updating to that. A few other things going back to the versioning on this. So when we're looking at managing virtual machines or multi-user machines, it's important to think about how do we handle that storage and how do we start doing some of the configurations. And so going into group policy, so again, managing these like we would on on-premise machine, we want to make sure that we're setting up appropriate policies for that. So looking at how do we make sure that people aren't always connected to our web source. If they step away for a half hour, do we really want to have that running? And one of the things is we can set idle session limits. We can disconnect users if they're idle for too long. We want to use mapped network drives. We want to use things like OneDrive, and we can auto configure OneDrive through that. That helps with that whole entire user experience. Other things to take into effect, disable Cortana. Again, extra processing you don't need. And then, Jen brought up a point to me yesterday that I just happened to completely overlook because I don't pay attention to the time clock. Windows virtual machines, anytime you spin up a new VM, the time zone is set for UTC. So unless all your users know UTC, you might want to have that controlled back to the local time zone. And the other nice thing about WVD is it's easy to do multi-regioning. So everybody has their own region for speed and efficiency as well.
So when we're building a non-persistent solution, we need a way to maintain user profiles. The user may not get the same VM every time they log in. Back in 2018, Microsoft purchased FSLogix, which is a solution for non-persistent computing, and it is used to manage user profiles in WVD. The product has been around for some time, and it's widely used in other virtualization solutions like Citrix and VMware. As a matter of fact, I don't ever use Citrix Profile Manager for the last couple of years. I've been only using FSLogix. FSLogix is a containerized solution where the profile is actually a VHDX or a VHD disk. When the user logs on, the VHDX is mounted and it appears as C users, C:\user /users username to the OS. And when the user logs off, the disk is unmounted. If you're familiar with roaming profiles, then you know about having to reset profiles. FSLogix almost eliminates profile corruption and those help desk calls to reset profiles. FSLogix also has app masking, which allows you to hide applications based on users or groups. So if you have a user that doesn't need to have Office, you want to use the same image, you can use app masking to hide that user or the group of users that don't need Office on the same image. There's another feature, another nice feature is Java redirection that accommodates the need if you have multiple Java versions on the same image. So, talking about profiles, we need a place to store the profiles, right? And so we have three choices for WVD. We have Azure Files with on-premises Active Directory integration, which is simply a serverless SMB file share created on an Azure storage account. And that's right, I said serverless. It's cool, I think it's cool anyway. You also have a choice of Azure NetApp files, which is a first-party storage solution, and you get great performance, but it does require a 4 terabyte minimum, and if you have a small deployment, it may not fit. And finally, you have the choice to just stand up file servers in Azure and create direct share. So since we're going to talk about a small environment, I'm going to use Azure Files with Active Directory integration for all my demos. Plus, I just think it's really cool. So we're gonna create a file storage account, which is part of the Azure PaaS. So as you can see, the PaaS services are designed to be publicly accessible to allow for communication externally. Well, if you're like me, you probably want a picture more like this, right? I don't want my storage account publicly accessible. So we can do this by setting up a private endpoint, which has an internal IP address from our subnet. So this allows internal communication within the VNet, and providing that there are no firewall rules blocking SMB, on premises will also be accessible. The private endpoint is a one-to-one mapping, meaning if you had other storage accounts or other PaaS services like a SQL server, you would need to set up a private endpoint for each service. So let's walk through a demo on how to do that. So I'm simply going to create a storage account here, and the name of the storage account has to be all lowercase, 15 characters or less, and unique to Azure. And on the network page, I'm going to select private endpoint and notice the DNS name provided to us, and we'll get an IP address assigned from our subnet on for the private endpoint. So if you remember, we were using custom DNS. So we must go to Windows Server DNS and add that new zone for the private.file.core.windows.net. And then we need to create a host record with the storage name and the IP address of the private endpoint that we were given. You could probably do the same thing with a host file, but we're not going to do that, right? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing. I know there are questions in the chat, but it just keeps popping up and bubbling over.
Let's see here. One moment. What do we consider in small environments? Well, my environment's five licenses, so it's pretty small. Jen, what would you consider to be more of a smaller, like FSLogix environment versus the NetApp?
So for the NetApp, because it has a 4 terabyte minimum, it sort of rules out anything less than 4 terabyte, right? Because there's a cost consideration with NetApp, so it's cost plus size. Microsoft recommends, if you remember from that few slides back, their baselines are 30 gigs per user. That's honestly quite a lot. I don't see that users have that big of a profile, but they did that because if you have things like Teams and OneDrive, even though you sync on demand, the files could download and bloat the profile. And Teams also has some exclusions that you would want to put into because you do get profile bloat. So the 30 is actually the default. Yeah, for FSLogix. So yeah, do the math. Yeah, that's
Brian. Brian has the math there. It's about 130 users, estimates around 4 terabytes. And yeah, I guess, Jen, do you know, is there an advantage just having FSLogix, even if it's over 4 terabytes that you feel, or?
So with NetApp, you mean?
Yeah, NetApp, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, so NetApp has some really good IOPS. The performance is awesome. So if that's a big consideration, you definitely want to look at it. And it's actually, if you provision more storage, so the bigger the size, the better the IOPS. If you go through when you're doing, in the portal to pick the storage, the disk size, you'll notice when you look at the cost that the bigger the disk, the higher the IOPS. So that's like a general rule. So with NetApp being it's huge, it's going to give you better performance. So there's no more. We could keep going.
There was one other. Tom had a question about why does the storage account name have to be unique to all of Azure?
Because it's a PaaS service.
Yeah.
Right? If you're doing SQL, it's the same. It's shared.
It's like our cloud management gateways. They are unique.
Yeah.
You can't use FSLogix to the user's OneDrive storage. Or can you tie FSLogix to work with a user who has OneDrive redirect by chance, or?
Yeah. So what you would do is you would make sure the known folders are redirected in OneDrive, and set up for sync on demand in your group policy, and then they would still get like a little bit of overage every time they click, right? They would get a download, but there are settings in FSLogix, and then you can control them by group policy or individually, which you would not want to do. You would want to do it over centrally managed with GPOs. To set up Office as a separate VHDX, so you can do the profile container as one VHDX, and then the Office container can be separated out into a different VHDX. And FSLogix does have, in addition to OneDrive, there are also some Office-related settings. Okay.
Hopefully that answers everything, Stephen. Then I was actually going to ask if people wanted to show their hand. Has anybody else started using WVD or started testing with WVD in the environment? Ryan has. One thing I found fascinating, again, so when I first started working with WVD, I know the DNS around the storage actually took me a long time to actually realize what I was doing wrong with it. The fact that I was able to get my demo in Azure AD domain services up in one morning made me really, really happy because DNS took care of itself for me. So that made me happy.
Yeah. So this method I'm showing you is specific for the custom DNS, right? You're using Windows DNS with your hybrid scenario. If you were using Azure DNS, it would be different. And I also use the private endpoint. You could use a service endpoint. There's a cost consideration with that. It's sort of like, a service endpoint is sort of like a GRE tunnel to the PaaS service, right? So that's a little bit of a different setup.
I don't know. Let me click back on there for you. Is that okay? Hopefully that's what you wanted.
I think so. So we set up the DNS, and now we're just going to create this a file share. So it's very simple. You just add the file share and give it the size. And let's see if we can get to the next page. Okay. And now we're ready to join the storage account to AD. And in order to do that, we need this bit of PowerShell code that I pulled off of Microsoft documentation. And we also need the AZ Files hybrid PowerShell module. So once you download that, you run this, connect to your subscription, very easy, as Greg said. And after that, you would go back into Azure Portal and look under your storage account under configuration. You should see there the Active Directory is now set to enable, and the name of your domain shows up under Join Domain. One thing, it may take a while depending on sync times to see this, so you may have to wait like an hour depending on your sync time to see this pop up, right? So the final step to set up the storage is you need to assign permissions. So we need to set both the RBAC permissions for the storage account and the NTFS permissions for FSLogix. So we'll see, we'll go over here, and we need to set up two roles. We're going to do storage file data SMB share contributor for the users to be able to access the storage to write files, right, to write their profiles. And then I'm going to want to give my admins and support staff storage file data SMB shared elevated contributor to allow them for management. And so then, let's see. Next, I'm just going to set up NTFS permissions. So I simply just UNC to the share path, which is this // the storage name .file.core.windows.net / the file share name that we set up. And if we did the DNS all right, this should just work, right? And SMB is not being blocked. And then in the advanced settings, I can set up the permissions required for FSLogix. You can also use, icals and do a command line. Okay, so we've prepared, and now we're ready to deploy WVD. We've made sure we have all the prerequisites. We have an active Azure subscription. We have owner role. And from our networking diagram, we have a Windows Server Active Directory that's syncing to Azure Active Directory configured with either, let's say, AD Connect with our gateway connection. We have a domain join non-human or service account with no MFA and sufficient rights to join machines to the domain. We have our virtual network and an available subnet on our spoke, and we're using custom DNS. And we've made sure the firewall is not blocking any of the required ports. So the first step is to create the host pool. The host pool has the session hosts or the VMs and application groups connected. The application groups are then connected to the workspace, and the workspace correlates to the icons that the user sees, if you remember from the earlier walkthrough. So before we can go and create at the WVD Hub, we need to register Microsoft Desktop Virtualization Resource Provider. This does take a little bit of time, so it's not immediate, maybe could be like 5 minutes sometimes. So let's do this with a demo. Okay, so I'm going to start with the Windows Virtual Desktop service in the Azure portal, and I'm going to create a host pool. I create a new resource group to help keep my objects organized. This is helpful in deleting and cleanup. If the deployment fails and I have to start all over, it'll be easy for me to identify the objects to do cleanup if they're all in the same resource group. Next, I'll give it I'll give the host pool a meaningful name. And this is not a validation environment, so I'll just leave it at no. And I'll talk about that a little bit. And then I'm going to select the pool, because we're building the shared desktop. And then I can set the max number of users on a VM. And then I'll leave the load balancing for breadth first. Here on the virtual machines, I'm going to select yes to add virtual machines. And I'm going to keep the size, but you can change it here by just clicking on the change size link. I'm just going to select one to create one VM. And I'll give the prefix like 12 or less characters, because I want to leave room for the numbers that are added. And AD has that a 15 character limit. And for this demonstration, I'm just going to use the gallery image. But if we were using a custom image, you would just click on the link at the bottom and then browse to pick your image, which you would have that sysprep image that Doug was talking about. So next, you just select the spoke subnet. And then if you'll notice here that there's no public IP, because remember, that's just a reverse connect, there's no inbound. And I'm going to select yes on the specify the domain. And I pre-created my OU ahead of time. So I'm going to enter in the domain, and then I'll copy and paste that OU into the path. And I'm using that domain, that non-human domain join account that was provisioned to add machines to the OU. And then the password, which has to be a complex password. And so, oh, it even tells you in case you mess up, like I did. Apparently I couldn't type that day. Okay, so next we get to the workspace, and we're going to yes to register the app, the desktop app, and then define a workspace. And this is the workspace that the user will see all the icons. And then I'm not going to set tags, but you should definitely set tags, and then review and create. Now, the process usually takes somewhere about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on your what kind of day it's having in Azure. I've seen it go faster. In the essence of time, I went ahead and fast forwarded the video, and so we'll get a deployment here pretty quickly. And I can just click to go to resources. So here you can see I have one session host, which is my VM, and it's available, so it's already up. And then if I go under application groups, I have the default application group that's created. It automatically creates that default desktop application group for you every time you spin up. If you wanted to add applications, you're going to need to create that. So it also names it default desktop, which is not very friendly for users. So you can change it here. So I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it a new name. And all of this is easily done in the GUI. You can also do the same thing for the workspace. So it doesn't really matter what you call it on the inside, but if you want to change the name, it's also a friendly name change on the desktop. And so it's a new deployment, so I need to go ahead and provision the user. I can add myself here. You can also add groups. That was a big deal because in the last year, the fall classic version of WVD, you weren't able to add groups. So now we can do either apps or groups. And I'm just going to change and go under the hub, show you the workspace here. If you see, that's the demo workspace we created. And you can access the application groups here at this point too. So I just wanted to show you there's different ways to access. Okay, so now that we've set up our environment, that was it. That was how quick it was, by the way, to set it all up. There are some, nice to haves here that you would definitely want to set up. Log analytics being one of them. You want to have insight into your environment, absolutely, especially if you're starting a new project and you want to understand what's going on. So with WVD, you have to actually manually set up the logging. So we'll go through the demo here. Okay, so you have to go through each one. So under workspace, we'll go under workspace, and then under monitoring, you'll see the diagnostic settings, and you can click add diagnostic setting, and then all the boxes checked on the left for login, I'll check all of them. So give it a meaningful name and just check every box. And I already set up the log analytics previously, so the log analytics workspace, I'm just going to pick that. I think most everyone using Azure has a workspace already defined. And then when you hit save, it's a little bit clunky. You have to actually X out from the right of the screen to get back. You can't, close it. And so you have to do this for each item. So you have to do it for the host pool. And this one has a little bit more information for the login. So you want to select all the boxes again, give it a name, and then we'll select the same log analytics workspace. This will take some time to collect data. So you'll need to wait, make sure your system's running, people are logging in before you can actually see data. And then I didn't show you in the demo, but you do the same thing for the application group as well. So this is after I've collected data, I went ahead and set up a workbook through the monitoring. And this is some of the stats that you can pull. So this is an overview page here. It's my lab, so it's not a whole lot. It gives you geolocation, daily connections, you have 3 host pools, application groups, in your workspace. These are tabs that you can click through and get diagnostic session details, when the user logged in, diagnostics, even performance, how long it took, things like that. This actually is a little bit clunky to set up right now. I know they're working on it. There was a bit of PowerShell, and then there's some manual steps to actually add the WVD pieces in the logs into it. So it's a little bit time consuming. There's some good blog articles out there about setting it up if you want to go through it. And I'm happy to give you information if you like. And then remember I talked about the validation environment? So it's recommended that you set up a validation pool. And the validation pool will allow you to, when you click yes on validation, when Microsoft updates the managed services, so remember we had the infrastructure components in that middle block where the broker and the gateway and the web access services were all in there. When they do updates to that, that's pushed automatically. So if you want to know about that and have the ability to test those ahead of time, if you set up the validation pool, the validation trigger says, okay, you get those updates first there. And in order to kind of work with that, you want to know when those updates are coming. So you want to go into your service health and set up alerts for yourself, based on there's a WVD service here, and you can pick your regions and have this emailed to you just like you probably do for all the other Azure stuff. I just wanted to show you that. And then finally, but most importantly, it's security, right? You definitely want to set up MFA.
Everybody has MFA in their environment fully enabled right now, right? Show of hands. One person, two people.
Maybe we should ask the different.
I should ask who doesn't have MFA set up.
Right. That's good.
Oh, that's a good start. There's
Yeah.
50 people or 40 people in the meeting, so only 3 have MFA.
So definitely go and do MFA on Monday, given that today's Friday. Yeah, so you want to set up MFA. You can set up conditional access to better secure, and you also have the integration of the security center. So I want to show you this. So in the portal, you have the security center, and this gives you an overwhelming amount of information as far as there's a rule. No,
Who all has their I make changes in prod on Friday shirt on?
You can get a readout of all the things that you're not compliant in and just then attack them each individually. WVD is also compatible with Windows ATP if there's a slightly different installer that you can get from the portal that's specific for VDI. And so unless you're using some other security, antivirus solution, you can use Defender as well. And that was over to you, Doug.
Yeah, so of course, some of the main things to focus on were design. When you start designing this, don't build it like you're building it for a lab, unless of course you're building it for your lab. But kind of whiteboard out, how big is your environment? How many users are going to be using your virtual environment? Plan out, again, breadth of the machine. Do you want it to just as people log in, it kind of evenly logs them in, or do you want it to fill up the first available VM first and then roll over to the next one? As we all know with our config manager environments and with these NWSCUG meetings, log analytics is really important. Having information available to us, it's usually one of the things our community asks for constantly is, how do we get this more available for us to manipulate data? The main way here is to tie it into log analytics. Security, we don't use MFA clearly. Sadly, I know my lab doesn't have MFA actually enabled in it currently. It should, but security is really important. Our VMs don't need to have public IPs. They don't have to be completely open to the environment. In fact, I actually just was double checking something I'll show you in a minute for the VMs, but I don't use RDP for most of my VMs in Azure. I actually connect over Bastion for any of my testing, just it's easier. Connect to it from any environment. And then planning for your image management. Again, this is something down the road I'm hoping to be able to show a lot more on. Especially I want to be able to use items like WimWich or Config Manager or MDT to really help automate just in general the image and like being able to configure that and kick off that monthly task. I've done it for Hyper-V before. I'm sure a lot of people here have done that for Hyper-V or VMware environments. So making sure that's accounted for. Do you need to do your image every month? What applications do you need to do? Some things that I should mention again, like especially for device and image management, is make sure when you're working with applications that you check if they are able to support multi-user sessions. One of the ones is like Microsoft Teams. You actually have to have a custom setting enabled on Teams to better handle WVD. And for those virtual environments, there's other settings that help optimize it for your audio and sound connections. So it's a lot of information to cram into an hour. So if you have questions, let us know. Otherwise, I'm going to change the screen real quick, Jen, if that's okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
So let me minimize this and get back over to my virtual machines.
Did someone have a hand up? A question?
Make sure you're licensed to use it in a virtual environment. That is very important, Brian, yes. Jen, or you can see them now, right?
Yeah, I see them. They're a little delayed, so it's like a bubble and then a delay. I don't know why.
Careful answering Mike. It's always a loaded question from him.
Yeah, I can't really tell you about it. No, I'm just kidding. It was 20,000.
Was that 20,000 users that were accessing it?
No, that was VMs.
Oh, okay.
It supported. It was. I'm not sure how many users it supported, but it was at the beginning of COVID, and it was to support 1 million children going back to school.
Oh, that's a significant size.
Yes.
So I'm going to share my screen real quick again. See if that's the right display. Hopefully it is, because my Teams went away again to hide what I'm sharing. So, well, let me get back over here. Again, I do all my testing in production environments. So one thing that I want to show again was the virtual machine. So to do a really basic image capture when we want our own custom image or custom applications to do pre-configurations, a really simple method of that was to build a virtual machine in Azure, and we can connect with RDP, or again, I use Bastion. But then once you're ready and you have that sys prepped for you, you can just hit capture here and it'll pull the image down and configure however you want, which resource group you want it available to or configured to, and then the machine name. And then building in a new, say we're building a new host pool.
Sorry, Greg, I want to add one little thing. So when you capture the image, with the ARM integration, you have the availability to put it in the shared image gallery.
Yes.
And take advantage of being able to replicate it across regions and, countries.
It really helps, especially again, if you are multi-regional, which I know there's a lot of organizations that are here.
That's good.
So,
And another nice thing about the shared image gallery is that you can version it. So you can keep the version update, the previous version, so when you roll out, so let's say you have an A pool and a B pool, you run your updates and you roll them out and you drain out the old pool, you still have that image in case you have a problem and you want to go back to it.
right. So then basically, instead of choosing the image from the gallery, I can go down to my images and disks. And since it's a really simple environment, or if you had a shared image here, you can just grab your image that you built. And it does actually, it works well. I was going to see if I had my connection open as well, which I don't at the moment.
One more thing I want to mention, because this caused me some agony. It's one of those things that bugged you and you don't forget about it. So the sysprep process didn't happen correctly, even though it seemed to. So you sysprep and it drops your RDP connection, and then you wait for it to shut down. It stops, and you need to make sure that the VM deallocates before you start doing that capture, because you can end up with a corrupted image. And in my situation, what happened is I deployed out the VMs and they appeared properly. The deployment didn't fail, so it was named correctly in Azure. And when you looked in Active Directory, the names were all the same because the sysprep didn't work right.
That would be no good.
Yeah, very.
I saw a hand come from, I believe, Steven. Steven, did you have a question, or did you want to come off mute to ask anything?
No, actually, I that was a mistake. Sorry.
No, just want to make sure. Otherwise, Greg, have you done any deployments with Adobe Creative Cloud or CAD software? And how do you handle licensing?
I haven't with those specific. I did do some graphic intensive, and I don't remember the name of the software exactly, but did have to use the GPUs. The VMs are a little bit more expensive, but you do get more users per VM.
Yeah, and Brian's right with the licensing mostly by named user at this point.
Cool.
So I popped open something under my demo Doug account, which I spun up again a little bit while ago. And I wanted to show this because the actual connection to this, if anybody hasn't used WVD, so since you can do regionally, like controlled by regions, it's really quick. Once my remote connection. And yes, I'm not using the local remote desktop client. I am well aware. But the web browser, I like the web browser. It's easy. Jen shakes her head at me. But so here's my virtual desktop again on a pooled computer that I have full access to. Everything's in FSLogix or our file storage, whatever we have configured there. Again, it works just like any machine of mine. So it's pretty solid.
It's from my years of building VDI, you always lock down in a multi-user environment because you have to remember that you're sharing the resources. So you don't want unnecessary one user pegging out a machine, playing games or something and affecting the other users, especially it's cloud resources and we're paying for it. So you might want to use your policy to lock down things like maybe the store, you know.
And the store is something interesting here, because if you're still watching the VM, one issue that I have seen is, so if the store is updating my user-based apps, is it updating everybody's user-based apps? So we might want to more micromanage that with a VDI or a VHD environment. So I don't like to call on disabling the store, but sometimes with these types of environments, if we're going to manage it and make sure the apps are always up to date with other software or with refreshes of the image, it might be something to take into account.
Yes, indeed. And the Teams, you know, you mentioned, you touched on it. The Teams machine-wide install is different from the user install. So you definitely want to make sure that something isn't getting updated that doesn't need to be. Yeah.
So you can sideload apps. You can fully disable the Microsoft Store. I don't like people disabling the store. If you've ever been in one of my sessions, I usually end up yelling at people who disable the store, because they disable it on one-to-one devices, and that's a bad thing to do unless you're sideloading apps every single day or making sure they're always up to date. Otherwise, what you're supposed to do is just set the store to private and fully control it via your company, your store for business or store for education.
Yeah. Good.
And then the only other thing again is WVD. I know, talking with Jen, it doesn't have native Intune support yet, but I'm hoping that's coming soon.
It's on the roadmap. The Intune is definitely on the roadmap.
But as I was saying earlier, I'm guessing anybody who runs Tech Preview or reads all the config manager documentation, which I know most of us do, 2006 did add a little bit more capability for WVD.
Yeah.
Isn't Microsoft? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. You can use config manager, the newer version, to push out, yes, and manage. Oh, I don't know about that one.
No, I do. Philip, I always think of if Microsoft, I haven't actually seen Microsoft say they're getting rid of Store for Business, but if they are, I'm guessing it's going to evolve to something better. How's that for a political way of wording it? We all hope that's the case. I haven't seen anything about it actually being removed or deprecated. It's still there. It still works. There's no way it would just get turned off and break everybody's configurations that use it. There would have to be a roadmap in place for you to migrate to something else. Maybe like Software Center or Company Portal, I could hope. Any other questions on WVD for Jen or I on that? Just want to make sure I have everything covered.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Company Portal, right.
All right. Well, if there's any final questions, throw them out. I will share screen for our final raffle.